To counter your opponent grabbing your arm and torso, grab your opponent's hand with your free hand. Use your other hand to grab his elbow. Your opponent may still retain his grip on this hand. Use your thumb and first two fingers to press into the sides of his hand. Position your thumb between the thumb and finger bones in his hand. Position your fingers on the palm side of the finger bones in his hand. By squeezing down on these pressure points, you can loosen his grip to release his hold. Use the thumb on your other hand to squeeze the muscle over his elbow on his forearm. Roll his elbow to the outside, bend his wrist back, pressing his palm to his forearm. In this hold, you can work the pressure points in his hand and elbow as you simultaneously hyperflex his wrist. In this variation, grab his hand that is restraining your arm with your free hand. Twist his wrist using your restrained arm to extend his elbow. Bring his arm over and down, twisting his palm to face the floor. Your hands are on opposite sides of your opponent's arm. Roll his arm over to press down on his elbow, keeping his arm straight. Use your thumb to press his thumb while gripping his wrist with your fingers. Twist and extend his arm simultaneously. In this variation, use your free hand to remove his hand from your torso. Place your fingers on the palm side of his wrist with your thumb on the back of his hand. Grab his elbow with your other hand. Push his elbow up as you twist his palm back. Keeping his forearm extended and twisted, bring his forearm to the floor. Hyperextend his elbow as you twist his hand to break his grip on your torso. Use your thumb to press the little finger side of his hand while gripping his wrist with your fingers. Twist and extend his arm simultaneously. In this variation, grab your opponent's hand on your torso. Bend your elbow to trap his wrist between your upper arm and your forearm. Twist your opponent's hands so that their palms are facing out and their little fingers are pointed up. Pinch his hand between your elbow, twisting his wrist. In this variation, use your forearm to trap your opponent's wrist against your upper arm. Locking your arm and your elbow, turn your body to bring your opponent off balance. Your forearm pins and twists his wrist. Your opponent must grab your upper arm for this technique to work. Press the little finger side of his hand to his wrist. To take your opponent down, add your free hand to press down just above his elbow to hyperextend his arm. Press his arm up with your body, keeping his wrist locked in your forearm. In this variation, lift your restrained arm up to loosen his grip, then grab his elbow and twist in and up. Grab his other hand to restrain it. Twist his elbow so that his inner arm faces up. Squeeze in with his other hand so he cannot twist out. To upset his balance, step so that he pivots around you. To counter your opponent grabbing your collar, grab his hand with both hands. Lean forward and sink, pressing the back of his hand towards his forearm to hyperextend his wrist. Twist to take him down. Use your thumbs to push his fingers back, while your little fingers lock his wrist. Squeeze his hand in from the sides with your palms. Step back as you lean forward, using your body to help press his hand back and extend his arm. Bring the inside of his forearm to the floor. Once you secure his hand, lean, turn, and sink in one fluent motion. In this variation, grab his hand with the same hand. Use your forearm to twist his arm over. Press down on his elbow to hyperextend it. Sink your body down to take him down. Twist his wrist so his fingers and his elbow point up. In this variation, twist his arm back while pulling his shoulder forward. Sweep his foot to take him down. With your opposite hand, twist his wrist so his thumb points down and his fingers point to the side. With your other hand, grab the back of his upper arm, keeping his elbow extended. Press his wrist back as you pull his upper arm forward and down. Simultaneously, sweep his leg. After your opponent falls, pivot to follow him while keeping hold of his arm. In this variation, grab his hand with your same hand and his elbow with your other hand. Twist his arm so that his thumb points down and his palm faces out. Pivot to bring him off balance. Bring his forearm to the floor to take him down. When your opponent follows the collar grab with a punch, grab his punch at his wrist and elbow. Twist his wrist so that his elbow faces up. Press down on his elbow to hyperextend it. To take him down, cross his arms, pressing down with his extended arm. By restraining his fist and manipulating his elbow, you can control his entire arm. His body will follow. To counter your opponent grabbing your collar with both hands, grab his wrist from above and below, with your right hand to his right wrist and your left hand to his left wrist. Twist his arms to cross his elbows. By continuing to twist his arms around each other, you can lock his upper body and take him down. Grab your opponent with your arms coiled so that you can have the advantage to twist his arms. In this variation, step in and press your shoulder against your opponent as you twist his arms. This locks his body by pinning his shoulder in opposition to his twisted arms. Using the crook of your opponent's elbow, hyperextend his other arm. His folded arm is trapped by your shoulder and your grip. By placing your shoulder beneath your opponent's shoulder while pulling on his twisted arms, you can pin him by extending his body over your shoulder. To place your shoulder correctly, sink your stance instead of leaning your body. Pull his folded arm down while hyperextending his other arm and keeping your shoulder up. To counter your opponent grabbing your shoulder from behind, swing your arm and turn your body to trap his arm under your arm. Use your arm to hyperextend his elbow. Use your free hand to press down on his shoulder. By bringing your hand to your own forearm, you can lock his entire arm. Sink your body, bringing his shoulder to the ground to pin his body down. Your body pivots fluently in a complete circle as you capture your opponent's arm and bring him down. To counter your opponent grabbing your shoulders with both hands from behind, swing your arm in the same manner as if he was grabbing you with one arm. However, trap both of his elbows. Use your free hand to push his shoulder over and down. Squeezing his elbows together will raise one shoulder and upset his balance. Push his shoulder over as you pull his elbows in, taking him down. Pivot your body fluently in a complete circle. Sink down as you pivot while keeping his elbows secured under your arm to bring your opponent down. Squeeze your opponent's elbows together by curling your arm around his elbows and pushing his upper arm in with your other hand. Maintain your grip on his elbows after he falls, shifting your other hand to grip underneath his upper arm. Keep his hands locked under your armpit by pressing your arm into your torso. Lock his elbows with your forearm and press his upper arm with your other hand. To counter your opponent grabbing your hair, grab his hand and break his grip. Press back on his fingertips, hyperextend his wrist, and bring him down. To break his grip, place the heels of your palms against the sides of his hands and squeeze. This collapses his hand and frees his fingers from your hair. Close your thumbs underneath his fingers. Use your thumbs to press his fingers back toward his forearm. Close your fingers around the back of his hand for leverage. Hyperextending his fingers and wrist will lock his forearm. By sinking your hands, you can bring his forearm to the ground. His body will follow. After you bring his forearm down, pull his hand forward to bring him completely to the ground. Use the ground to lock his forearm as you continue to press his hand back. To counter your opponent grabbing your hair from behind, grab his hand and elbow. Squeeze his hand with your fingertips to loosen his grip. Step behind him and twist his arm up and behind his back. While lifting his hand to his shoulder, pinch his elbow with your other hand. Grab his hand first so he cannot pull your hair or jerk your head around. Step and twist in the same motion. In this variation, grab his hand with both of your hands, sliding one hand under and behind your opponent's hand. Press into the sides of his hand to release his grip. Continue to pivot, turning his palm to face up and extending his elbow. Pull his wrist forward to upset his balance and take him down. Bring his wrist to the ground. Pivot your body fluently in a complete circle. Use one hand to press his palm back towards his forearm as you pull forward with his other wrist. In this variation, grab your opponent's hand and break his grip as you turn to face him. From here, take him down in the same manner as you would if he was grabbing you from the front, hyperextending his wrist and bringing it to the floor. As you pivot, sink down to bring his forearm to the floor. Use your fingers and thumbs to hyperextend his fingers and wrists. In this variation of the hair grab from the front, squeeze your opponent's hand to break his grip. Using your whole body, pivot to the side to extend his wrist sideways. This technique can extend both his wrist and his elbow. By pressing his wrist down and lifting his fingers up, you can bring your opponent down. To counter your opponent grabbing your ear, grab his fingers to break his grip, hyperextending his wrist. Use your other hand to lock his elbow. Grab his hand using your thumb to pry up the little finger side of his hand. Hyperextend both his wrist and elbow. In this variation, grab his hand using your thumb to pry up the thumb side of his hand. Use your other hand to grab his elbow, pushing it up to hyperextend it. Rotate his arm so that his palm faces up, keeping his arm hyperextended. Pull his wrist down to the floor and press his elbow down to take him down. Pivot your body in one fluent motion so that your opponent must circle around you until he falls. While most other grabs are preparations for a punch or an attempt to restrain, choke holds pose an immediate threat to life. A solid choke may not block your airway, rather it can stop your carotid arteries, blocking blood flow to your brain. This can result in the loss of consciousness in a matter of seconds. To counter your opponent choking you, first save your neck. Free your arteries and your airway from any obstruction. To counter your opponent choking you with his arm, pull his arm away from your neck. Grab his other hand and step behind him, slipping under his armpit. Twist his arm so that it is wedged under his stomach. After freeing your neck from his arm, twist his other hand so that his thumb points to the floor. Twisting his hand out will lock his arm against his body, controlling his torso. To counter your opponent choking you with both hands, pull his thumbs toward you with your fingers while pushing his little fingers away from you with your thumbs. Pull your opponent's hands out to twist his elbows along with his wrists. Cross his arms, pushing his top arm down, locking his other arm. Work the twist on this other wrist to take him down. Follow his body as he falls, sinking down with your opponent, never relinquishing control of the arm lock. This entire movement should be made as one fluent motion, simultaneously pivoting your body and twisting his arms. Use your torso to twist your opponent, not just your arms, so that your whole body turns into this movement. To counter your opponent choking you with both hands from behind, pull his thumbs down with your fingers while pushing his little fingers up with your thumbs. Pull his arms forward and hyperextend his elbows across your shoulders. Pry his thumbs off your neck with your fingers. Without his thumbs, he has nothing to oppose his fingers to secure a grip. Keeping a secure grip on his thumbs with your fingers, press forward with your thumbs to hyperextend his wrists along with his elbows. Step back into your opponent. When you hyperextend his elbows, you want to be able to lift him up on his toes. Your shoulders act as a fulcrum for your opponent's arms. Bending over slightly brings the weight of your torso to bear on his elbows and wrists. To counter your opponent choking you with his arm, grab his hand, pulling his thumb down with your fingers while pushing his little fingers up with your thumb. Slide underneath his arm, grabbing his elbow with your free hand. Bring his hand behind him, pressing his palm to his back. You can use your free hand to control his elbow or shoulder. By controlling his joints, you can control his arm. Push down with both hands to take your opponent down. To counter your opponent grabbing your neck from behind, circle your arm to catch his forearm under your arm. Twist his elbow in with your elbow to lock his arm and upset his balance. Use your free hand to push him over. As you turn to circle your arm, your body movement will loosen his grip. Pressing his elbow in will break his grip completely. Twist his elbow up as you press his shoulder down to take him down. Sink your body down with your opponent's as he falls, never relinquishing your arm lock. Turn your body and lock your opponent's arm in one fluent movement. Maintain your lock on your opponent's arm, trapping his hand under your arm while controlling his shoulder with your hand. To counter your opponent grabbing your arm and torso, grab his arm with your trap and with your other hand. Push his neck to take him down. Pull his arm in and down while you push his head out and down to work his neck. Lean forward with your torso to add leverage to your push. As you establish your hold, sink your center of balance down and widen your stance, bending your knees. This gives you a better foundation to throw your opponent. To counter this technique, slip your hand behind your opponent's hand and your neck. Bring your other hand to his elbow while grabbing his wrist. Roll his arm over and press his arm to hyperextend his elbow. Place his forearm on the floor to take him down. Grab your opponent's forearm with both of your thumbs pointing toward each other. Twist his arm to hyperflex his wrist. Pivot to circle your opponent around you, controlling his forearm to control his arm and torso. To counter your opponent attempting to grab your torso, grab one of his hands as he slips them under your arms. Use both of your hands to hyperextend that wrist while trapping his other hand under your arm. Lean forward to add leverage to the wrist lock. Extend his palm towards his knee with his fingers pointing up. To increase your level of control, step behind his leg with your leg to prevent him from stepping back and set up a takedown. In this variation, lock his wrist by pulling his fingers to the side. As you pull him to the side, shift one hand to his knee and lift. As he falls, shift your hands to his ankle and foot. Twist his ankle while pressing his leg down. Make an opening to grab his leg by upsetting his balance with the wrist lock. Turn with him as he falls so that you have the best leverage to twist and lock his leg. In this variation, the takedown is made with a hip throw. This is a faster technique. However, you lose control of your opponent after he falls. As you seize his wrist, step behind your opponent and sink down into a stable stance. Hyperextend his wrist to the side, forcing him to trip over your leg. To counter your opponent applying a full Nelson, grab his fingers with your hands. Pry them back with your fingers, squeezing and hyperextending his fingers. Pull his hands to the side and step behind your opponent. Pull back on one hand, hyperextending his fingers and wrist, so that he trips over your leg. Place your fingers over his fingertips, curling his fingers back as you peel his fingers off of your neck. Concentrate your efforts on only a few of his fingers. The rest of his hand will follow. You will fall on top of your opponent if you do not relinquish your grip on his fingers. Use his body to break your fall. To counter your opponent grabbing your legs, drop straight down to your knees as you press his neck down. Stay on top of your opponent, pushing his head to the floor. Your opponent cannot take advantage of his leg hold if you are already on the ground. By sitting down, you can control his arms. use your free hand to control his head, bearing down on his neck with all of your weight. Once you have control of his head, grab his ankle with your free hand. Lift his ankle above his body, then press down with both hands so that all of his weight is focused on his extended neck. In practice, be exceedingly careful with any attack to the neck. The neck muscles will instinctively lock to protect the spinal cord, which may take a long time to relax and heal. In this variation, grab your opponent's head with both hands and twist his neck. By continuing to twist your opponent's head, the rest of his body will follow. Grab the back of his head and the point of his chin. Push his head and pull his chin. After he falls, you may switch your hands to maintain control. To counter your opponent grabbing your legs from the side, grab his knee with your closest hand. Lift his leg to take him down. Sink down with him and control his other leg with your leg. Once your opponent is down, you can grab his knee and twist his hip or place your knee in his groin. To counter your opponent from a handshake, twist his arm in and use your free hand to control his shoulder. Pull his fingers toward the center of his back to work his arm. Hyperextend his wrist and hyperflex his elbow. Use your entire forearm in his back to prevent him from twisting out of this lock. Stay with him if he steps away from you to try and get away. In this variation, bend his wrist with his palm up and finger pointing down. Use your free arm to lock his elbow. Hyperextend both his wrist and elbow. Press the back of his hand toward his forearm. Hyperextend his elbow over your forearm, pressing down with your armpit. In this variation, grab his wrist with both hands and only hyperextend his wrist. Control his elbow with your arm. Pull his fingers to his forearm, locking his wrist with your thumbs. Keep his elbows sunk to maximize the extension of his wrist. In this variation, pivot your body and step into your opponent. Wrap your forearm against your lower back for leverage. Control his elbow with your free hand. All of the momentum from pivoting your body will transfer into this arm thrust. If your opponent fails to react, you will take him down. In this variation, grab your opponent's hand with both hands as you step in, placing your shoulder under his shoulder. Hyperextend his wrist and shoulder, lifting him up on his toes. Extend his wrist and step in with one fluent motion. Point his fingers toward his back as you keep his shoulder up over your shoulder. Keep his arm extended for this entire technique. To counter your opponent grabbing your belt from behind, grab his wrist with one hand as you turn the other direction. Use your other hand to seize his collarbone. Hyperextend his elbow across your upper arm. When you grab his wrist, wrap that arm against your lower back for leverage. Follow his arm with your other arm to bring your grip to his collarbone. Press in just above his collarbone as you maintain control of his wrist. To counter your opponent grabbing your belt and collar from behind, pivot your body and swing your arm over to seize both of your opponent's elbows. Grab your hand with your other hand, pushing his elbows down. Sink down to bring your opponent down. Squeeze his elbows together with your arm. Pivot and sink your whole body to bring him down. Use your palm against the point of his elbow. Do not relinquish your hold on his elbows. To counter your opponent pushing your chest with both hands, pin his hands to your chest with your forearms. Drop to a crouch, hyperextending his wrists and bringing him down. Chop his neck with your top hand. Bring that hand under his while controlling his wrist. Lock his arm and bring his shoulder to the floor. Press down on his wrists when you pin his hands. Lean forward as you drop. Chop his throat to make an opening for the arm lock. Wrap your elbow around his elbow. Then grab his shoulder. While locking his shoulder with one hand, press his wrist to his shoulder with your other hand. Your top hand makes all the offensive movements while your bottom hand maintains control of one of his arms. Pin his shoulder to the ground while working his arm so he cannot escape.